Have you ever noticed that some parts of history feel incomplete? Entire civilizations appear for a few pages, then disappear. Certain people shaped the world, but their names rarely made it into textbooks. Tonight, you're about to see evidence that challenges what many people grew up learning. We'll uncover claims surrounding Black Native Americans. Witness the moment an African emperor crushed a colonial army at Adwa. Travel back nearly 20,000 years to examine one of the oldest mathematical tools ever discovered, uncover the ancient name linked to Africa, and reveal the Nubian kings who ruled Egypt itself. Some of these stories are debated. Some are supported by archaeology and historical records. All of them raise one question: what happens when history is written by only a few voices? Subscribe and stay with me, because the next few minutes may change how you look at the past. What if one of the biggest hidden stories in American history was erased on purpose? What if Africans were already in the Americas before Christopher Columbus stepped onto Caribbean shores? What if Black Native Americans fought wars, built powerful communities, escaped slavery together, and helped create some of the richest Black towns in U.S. history? For generations, their names were removed from records. Their faces were erased from paintings. Their descendants were told they did not belong. But the evidence never disappeared. From the deadly swamps of Florida, where Black Seminoles fought the U.S. Army, to the broken promises of the Dawes Rolls, and the rise of Tulsa's Black Wall Street, this is the hidden history of Black Native Americans. And by the end of this documentary, you may question everything you were taught about America's past. For centuries, schools taught a simple story. In 1492, Columbus sailed across the Atlantic and discovered America. But history is rarely simple. Long before Columbus arrived, stories circulated about dark-skinned people already living or traveling through the Americas. Some researchers point to ancient Olmec heads in Mexico. Massive stone sculptures carved thousands of years ago with broad noses and full lips. Features many believe resemble Africans. Others point to African ocean currents that naturally carried ships from West Africa toward the Americas. Even Columbus himself recorded sightings of dark-skinned traders in the Caribbean carrying metal-tipped spears before he reached the mainland. Were Africans already crossing the Atlantic centuries before Europe officially acknowledged the New World? The debate remains controversial. Some historians reject these theories completely. Others argue that evidence was ignored because it challenged the European-centered version of history. But one fact cannot be denied. By the 1500s, Africans and Native Americans were already interacting across the Americas. Some came as enslaved people fleeing European control. Others escaped plantations and found refuge among native tribes. And over time, these alliances changed the future of America forever. As slavery expanded across the American South, thousands of enslaved Africans searched desperately for freedom. Some escaped north. Others disappeared into forests, mountains, and swamps. And many found allies among Native American tribes. The Seminoles of Florida became one of the most famous examples. The Seminole Nation itself was already formed from different native groups who resisted European control. They understood survival. They understood war. And many accepted escaped Africans into their communities. These Black Seminoles did not live as slaves. Many became interpreters, scouts, farmers, and warriors. Families intermarried. Cultures blended together. But freedom came with a price. The United States government viewed these alliances as a threat. Slave owners demanded escaped Africans be returned. The Seminoles refused. And soon, America launched one of the longest and most expensive wars in its history, the Seminole Wars. For years, Black Seminoles and Native fighters used Florida's swamps as deadly traps. U.S. soldiers struggled in the heat, disease, and unfamiliar terrain. Small ambushes became nightmares for the American military. Some Black Seminole fighters became legends. One of them was John Horse, a warrior, translator, and leader who helped organize resistance against the U.S. Army. Even when forced westward during Indian removal, many Black Seminoles continued fighting for survival. Some eventually fled all the way to Mexico to escape slavery forever. In the 1830s, the United States government forced Native nations from their ancestral lands in the Southeast. The Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations were pushed westward in brutal marches remembered today as the Trail of Tears. Thousands died from disease, starvation, and exposure. But hidden inside this tragedy was another painful story. Many Native nations had also adopted African slavery under pressure from European American systems. So, alongside Native families, marched enslaved Black people. Some were treated as property. Others were deeply connected through marriage and shared ancestry. And when the suffering ended in Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma became home to thousands of Black Native families. Then came the Civil War. Some Native nations sided with the Confederacy. Others supported the Union. When the war ended, the U.S. government demanded new treaties in 1866. These treaties carried major promises. Formerly enslaved people within Native nations, known later as freedmen, were supposed to receive citizenship rights within those tribes. On paper, freedom had arrived, but the fight over identity was only beginning. In the late 1800s, the U.S. government introduced a system that would permanently reshape Native identity: the Dawes Rolls. Officials claimed the goal was organization and land distribution, but the process divided families into categories: by blood or freedmen. Even siblings with the same parents could be classified differently depending on appearance, politics, or local officials. Many Black Native descendants who had lived in tribes for generations suddenly found their identities questioned. Paper records replaced community memory. Blood quantum rules became weapons. Some Native leaders feared losing land and sovereignty. Others argued the freedmen deserved full citizenship under the treaties of 1866. Families who once lived together were separated legally overnight. And these decisions still affect descendants today. Many continue fighting for tribal recognition, citizenship, and historical acknowledgement. The debate is emotional because it is not only about ancestry, it is about belonging. Despite discrimination and broken promises, Black Native communities continued building. In Oklahoma, Black settlers founded thriving towns. More than 50 all-Black towns emerged after Reconstruction. One of the most famous was Greenwood in Tulsa, known later as Black Wall Street. Many Black Native descendants became business owners, ranchers, educators, and community leaders. Oil wealth transformed parts of Oklahoma into booming economic centers. Elegant hotels rose beside Black-owned banks, theaters, newspapers, and schools. Greenwood became proof that Black communities could create extraordinary prosperity even under segregation. But success attracted hatred. In 1921, racial violence exploded in Tulsa. White mobs destroyed Greenwood. Homes burned. Businesses vanished. Hundreds may have died. And once again, history was buried for decades. Yet survivors rebuilt. Because survival had always been part of the story of Black Native Americans. Today, descendants of Black Native Americans continue fighting legal and cultural battles. Some tribes restored freedmen citizenship rights after court rulings. Others remain divided over identity and membership. DNA tests cannot fully solve the issue, because tribal belonging has never been based only on genetics. It is also history, culture, community, and survival. Many descendants carry stories passed down quietly through generations. Stories of grandparents who hid Native ancestry out of fear. Stories of records altered or erased. Stories of families split by government classifications. Social media and independent historians have helped revive these conversations. Old photographs are being rediscovered. Forgotten cemeteries are being documented. And younger generations are asking questions previous generations were afraid to ask. The hidden history is finally returning to public memory. For centuries, these stories survived through whispers, family memories, and hidden records. Now the world is finally paying attention. The story of Black Native Americans is not just about race. It is about survival, identity, resistance, and the fight to keep history alive when powerful systems tried to erase it. If this documentary changed the way you see history, subscribe right now. Share this video with someone who has never heard this story before. And turn on notifications because the next documentary uncovers another hidden chapter of forgotten history the world tried to bury. Your support helps keep these stories alive. History is not only written by the victors. Sometimes it survives through the people who refuse to forget. The hidden story of Black Native Americans still lives in family records, tribal debates, forgotten towns, and descendants searching for the truth. And this is only one chapter, because another hidden history changed America forever. Watch our next documentary, The African Kingdom Europe Feared. The story of the powerful African empire so wealthy and advanced that European powers feared its influence across the world. In the late 19th century, when much of Africa was being carved up by European powers, one man stood against the tide of colonization. His name was Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia, the king who achieved the unthinkable. He defeated Italy and preserved his nation's independence. Born in 1844, Menelik II rose to power during a time when European nations scrambled for Africa's resources. Ethiopia, with its rich culture and proud history, became a target for Italy. In 1889, Menelik signed the Treaty of Wuchel with Italy. But hidden within the Italian version was a deceitful clause claiming Ethiopia was now an Italian protectorate. Menelik rejected this falsehood, and the stage was set for war. On March 1, 1896, the Battle of Adwa changed history. Menelik rallied over 100,000 Ethiopian warriors, men and women alike, to face the invading Italian army. Outnumbered and unfamiliar with the rugged terrain, the Italians were crushed. The Ethiopians captured thousands of Italian soldiers and delivered one of the greatest defeats ever suffered by a colonial power in Africa. The victory at Adwa forced Italy to recognize Ethiopia's full independence in the Treaty of Addis Ababa. Menelik II became a symbol of African resistance, proving that colonization was not inevitable. His leadership not only secured Ethiopia's sovereignty, but also inspired freedom movements across the continent. Emperor Menelik II remains a towering figure in world history, the king who defeated Italy and showed that Africa could stand free. His legacy lives on as a beacon of courage and independence. Long before the world called it Africa, it was known by another name, Alkebulan, a name whispered by the winds of history, meaning Mother of Mankind and Garden of Eden. The name Alkebulan is one of the oldest known names for the African continent. Ancient civilizations, from the Moors to the Nubians, used it to describe their vast and diverse homeland. It is believed to come from indigenous languages, signifying the place where humanity began. Alkebulan was not just a name, it was a living, thriving continent. The world's first great civilizations rose here. Kemet, known today as ancient Egypt, built towering pyramids. The kingdom of Kush thrived along the Nile. Carthage ruled the seas of the Mediterranean. And far inland, empires like Mali and Songhai became centers of learning and trade. So how did Alkebulan become Africa? The change began after Rome conquered Carthage in 146 BC. The Romans called the region Africa Terra, land of the Afri tribe. Over centuries, European explorers and colonial powers spread the name Africa across maps until Alkebulan faded from common memory. To remember the name Alkebulan is to honor Africa's identity beyond colonial history. It reminds us that this land was the birthplace of humankind, a cradle of culture, science, and innovation long before outside influence. It speaks of a time when Africa defined itself. Today, we call it Africa, but the name Alkebulan still carries the heartbeat of the continent's ancient soul. Let us remember it, not as a relic of the past, but as a living part of Africa's story. The oldest calculator wasn't made in Europe. It was found in Africa, carved into a piece of bone, 20,000 years ago. This is the story of the Ishango bone, the oldest mathematical tool ever discovered, and a hidden gem in African math history. In the 1950s, Belgian archaeologist Jean de Heinzelin made a groundbreaking discovery in the Democratic Republic of Congo, near the Semliki River. Inside a cave, buried with ancient remains, he found a small dark bone, later named the Ishango bone. But this wasn't just a fossil, it was history's oldest math artifact. The Ishango bone is about 10 centimeters long and made from a baboon's fibula. But its real mystery lies in the 168 notches carved in 3 distinct columns. These aren't random scratches, they form patterns that suggest mathematical knowledge. One column features prime numbers 11, 13, 17, and 19 grouped with intention. Another shows sequences like 3, 6, 4, 8, suggesting doubling and arithmetic understanding. Some scholars think it even tracks lunar cycles. Was it a lunar calendar? A multiplication tool? A division chart? Experts have debated its meaning for decades. Some suggest it reflects a base, 10 system, while others propose base, 12, possibly used for trade or astronomy. The idea that early Africans were tracking time, space, and numbers thousands of years ago? It's a major shakeup to how we teach math history. The Ishango bone predates Egyptian pyramids, Babylonian tablets, and even the earliest known Greek mathematics. It rewrites the narrative, proving that Africa was not just a cradle of life, but a cradle of logic, patterns, and scientific reasoning. This is more than a bone. It's proof of intellectual heritage, showing that math didn't begin in classrooms, but in the hands of people who looked up at the stars and saw meaning in patterns. So next time someone says math began in Greece, tell them about the Ishango bone. Tell them Africa counted first. If one of these stories surprised you already, type the word truth in the comments. I want to know which discovery caught you off guard most. And if hidden history interests you, subscribe because what comes next gets even harder to ignore. What if I told you that at one point in history, Egypt, the land of pyramids, mummies, and pharaohs, was ruled by black African kings from the south. Not invaders, not outsiders, but powerful Nubian warriors who conquered Egypt and became pharaohs. They didn't just rule Egypt, they revived it. This is the true story of the Black Pharaohs of Nubia, the kings who ruled Egypt. To understand this story, we must travel south of Egypt into ancient Nubia. Nubia was located in modern-day Sudan, stretching along the Nile River. The Nubians were master archers, so skilled that Egyptians called them Land of the Bow. They were traders, warriors, gold miners, and builders of pyramids. Yes, pyramids. In fact, Nubia has more pyramids than Egypt. Their kingdom became known as the Kingdom of Kush, with capitals at Napata and later Meroe. For centuries, Egypt and Nubia were rivals. Sometimes Egypt ruled Nubia, sometimes Nubia resisted. But everything changed around 750 BC. By the 8th century BC, Egypt was weak. Internal division, civil war, corrupt rulers, foreign threats. The once great civilization was falling apart. Meanwhile, in Nubia, a powerful king was rising. His name was Pi. Pi believed Egypt had lost its moral and spiritual direction. He saw himself not just as a conqueror, but as a restorer of order. So he marched north with his army, not to destroy Egypt, but to save it. City after city surrendered. Pi defeated rival Egyptian rulers and took control of Thebes, Egypt's religious heart. He became pharaoh. And just like that, a black African king ruled Egypt. This marked the beginning of Egypt's 25th dynasty, the Nubian dynasty. After Pi came even greater rulers. Shabaka. He reunited Egypt fully under Nubian rule and restored temples that had been neglected. He preserved ancient Egyptian texts, including the famous Shabaka stone. Taharqa, perhaps the most famous of the Black Pharaohs. Taharqa ruled at the height of Kushite power. He built massive temples in Karnak Temple. He expanded trade, strengthened Egypt's economy, revived religious traditions. But there was a problem. The Assyrian Empire, the powerful Assyria, was expanding. They wanted Egypt, and they were ruthless. The Assyrians invaded. Fierce battles erupted. Despite bravery, Taharqa was forced to retreat south. Eventually, the Assyrians captured Memphis and installed their own rulers. The Nubian pharaohs lost Egypt, but they were not destroyed. They returned to Nubia, and there, in Kush, they continued ruling for nearly 1,000 more years. Their capital later shifted fully to Meroe, where iron production, trade, and pyramid building flourished. Their civilization did not disappear. It evolved. For centuries, this story was minimized. Colonial historians often downplayed African civilizations. The idea that Black African kings ruled Egypt challenged racial narratives. But archaeology tells the truth. Statues with distinct African features, royal inscriptions, burial sites, temples. The evidence is undeniable. The 25th dynasty was real. The Black Pharaohs were real. And they ruled one of the greatest civilizations in history. This story is about more than power. It's about identity. It's about cultural pride. It's about a time when African kings ruled Egypt not as conquerors, but as restorers. They preserved temples, protected traditions, and proved that Africa's history is deeper and more powerful than many were taught. The pyramids of Sudan still stand today, silent, majestic, waiting to be remembered. So, what did we uncover today? Ancient mathematical knowledge that reaches back thousands of years. Powerful African rulers who changed history. Civilizations and stories many people never encountered in school. History isn't a fixed object. New evidence appears, interpretations change, and questions continue to surface. If you enjoy uncovering forgotten stories and historical mysteries, subscribe now because the next video goes even deeper. On your screen right now is another hidden chapter most people have never heard about. Click it because this story isn't finished.